So we are finally here, the penultimate episode of this series, and I guarantee you now, this is the one you have all been waiting for, because in this one, we're doing Thunderbird 2. So we've made it to everybody's favourite, that big green rescue machine, International Rescue's giant transporter, and possibly the most iconic cargo plane of all time. And I ain't going to beat about the bush with this one, because I know how much you lot have been looking forward to it. Thunderbird 2 has a maximum speed of 5,000 miles per hour, although it will more likely cruise at a stately 2,000 miles per hour. She's 60 foot high, but with her pod lowered, it reaches a height of 110 feet. Nose to tail, it's 250 foot long with a wingspan of 180 feet. So she's a big old girl, and as such she weighs in at 406 tonnes. But importantly, for international rescue, she can carry a cargo of up to 100 tonnes. And I was actually disappointed when I read that little fact, because a jumbo jet can carry 139 tonnes, just not at hypersonic speeds. Its maximum flight ceiling is 100,000 feet, and like all the rest of the Thunderbird machines, it's powered by atomic fusion reactors, which gives it unlimited range. This fusion reactor powers 2 enormous turbofan engines and 12 smaller ramjets, and perhaps most iconically and fun, it's got 4 rocket engines built into its landing legs. It is equipped with 2 large tranquilizer guns, which are really handy when fighting giant alligators in what is fast becoming my favourite episode. It carries a heat-proof rescue cage, a set of heavy-duty magnetic grabs, the famous Magna Grip. Obviously, it's got a winch. It's got a now infamously unreliable magnetic clamp launcher. It has a fully equipped air-to-air rescue compartment and carries a complement of 2 hover bikes, as well as being properly tooled up because it's got a demolition cannon and a rocket launcher. And finally, it is piloted by Virgil and co-piloted by Gordon. Although it has to be said, there's no actual seat for a co-pilot, so Gordon or whoever is mostly relegated to sitting in the back reading magazines or something. And as this series has progressed, I've kind of started to really enjoy doing these deep dives on each of the Thunderbird pilots, and I've been looking forward to doing this one because Virgil comes across as a little bit boring, although he is anything but boring. So, Virgil is the second oldest of the 5 Tracy brothers, and he was born on the 15th of August 2039, making him 27 years old. Like all of the Tracy brothers, he's an astronaut. At one point we even see him flying Thunderbird 3. And again, like the rest of his brothers, he's named after a real-life Mercury 7 astronaut. In this case, Virgil Gus Grissom. In universe, he is a graduate of the Denver Advanced School of Technology, where he studied mechanical engineering. And this came in useful for him in later years because, as more often than not, it's him that's driving the pod vehicles. Out of all 5 of his brothers, he's probably the most introverted. We sometimes see him painting portraits of his brothers, or sitting there just playing the piano. But out of all 5 brothers, he's the most like his mother. Virgil can seem a little bit boring, but I'm hoping to change that perception for you, because as I said a moment ago, he is anything but boring. So this is really subtle, but Virgil is actually the bravest of the 5 brothers. He has almost superhuman levels of bravery, as well as almost superhuman levels of focus. So anybody observing from the outside, it's almost like he hasn't got any sense of danger. But in fact, this isn't true. He's got a very keen sense of danger. But to him, it's just another factor in his equations, because he is so focused on the job in hand that he just doesn't allow it to distract him. And there are tons of examples of Virgil's bravery just smattered throughout the entire series. In the first episode of the series, for instance, he saves the lives of several hundred people and Tintin by letting them land their plane on the roof of his car. And in doing this, he shows zero emotion. He's driving not 1 but 3 cars at breakneck speeds down a runway waiting for a plane to land on the top of him. And that's not an easy thing to do. Just ask Richard Hammond. He even manages to crash the elevator car here, and at the end of it he's just like, oh well, I'm alright. I'll be fine, bruv. If that was me, I'd want medals. And again, this theme runs throughout the entire series. Like in the episode Terror in New York City, Thunderbird 2 has been shot down, he's been gravely injured, yet he's still raring to go. He's out of his hospital bed. He stood there all bandaged up, but he's like, yeah, come on, let's do this. Until his dad sends him back to bed. Or in the episode City of Fire, he's nearly been unalived by some crazy experiment Brains has been doing, developing some special gas that can cut through bank vaults or something silly. But a few days later, he's on the scene and he's like, hey, let's use Brains' new gas. I know it nearly unalived me a few days ago, but it'll get the job done without even batting an eyelid. And you'll often get other characters panicking around him as well. I watched an episode today, I was watching the Cham Cham, and there's a bit in it where they're rescuing Penelope and Tintin, and they've got Parker on the roof of this cable car trying to catch some wires. It's absolutely brilliant. You should definitely give it a watch. But Alan's with him, and Alan's freaking out. He's like, oh no, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. What's Parker playing at? But, as usual, Virgil's just chill. He's like, they'll be alright. Give him a couple of minutes, they'll be fine. But even with all this, Virgil isn't detached from reality. He's still very much a part of things. He's still very present. To him, everything is about factors. You've got the danger factor. You've got the what's happening on the ground factor. You've got the I've got to teach Alan a lesson factor. But the most important thing to him, the biggest factor, is saving people's lives. In that moment, he don't care about anything else. So yeah, he's really chill, but inside he cares deeply about things. So he's named after Virgil Gus Grissom. But I think he's based on another astronaut. I think he's based on Neil Armstrong, because Neil Armstrong is famously cool under pressure and almost a little bit introverted, but it was his calm and collected attitude that got him the job as commander of Apollo 11, because Buzz Aldrin was as qualified as him and arguably had a lot more charisma, but he just couldn't keep a cool head in the same way that Neil Armstrong could. And in his entire spacefaring career, his pulse only went above 170 BPM once, and even then that was when he was landing on the moon, quite a lot like Virgil. So that's who I think he's based on. So I think the perception of him being a little bit boring, well, that's completely undeserved, isn't it? It possibly stems from the amount of screen time he gets, because out of all 5 Tracy brothers, it's him and Scott that are on screen the most. But hey, Virgil may not be cool, but Virgil is a cool dude. Before I move on any further though, if you're liking my videos and you want more, consider hitting the like and subscribe button. You can also follow me on Twitter/X, and the Decline for British Sci-Fi has now got a Facebook page. I'll put the links to it in the description. But what about Thunderbird 2 though? That is what you were tuned in for, and to be honest with you, I don't blame you, because it is bloody awesome. It is gigantic green awesomeness. And if you say Thunderbirds to anybody, they're going to say one thing to you. They're going to go, Thunderbird 2. And that reputation is very well deserved, because Thunderbird 2 just is Thunderbirds. It represents the entire philosophy of the show. Also, there are several reasons behind the longevity of Thunderbirds, but one of the biggest reasons is Thunderbird 2. Bear with me, I am going to come to it, but I do need to talk about its launch sequence first, because it's very important to the argument I'm about to make. So, upon hearing a distress call, Jeff Tracy, he announces to the boys that there's aggro afoot. He dishes out his orders and he sends the boys to their Thunderbird machines. And each one of them's got a different launch sequence. But by far the most entertaining, thrilling and dynamic launch sequence in Thunderbirds belongs to Thunderbird 2. Virgil Tracy will step up to the portrait on the wall, and this portrait is of his father's rocket, the rocket that took Jeff Tracy to the moon. This will then tilt backwards and Virgil will slide backwards down towards Thunderbird 2. About halfway down the chute, he will turn around and continue his forward journey. He slides directly into the pilot seat, which then sits him upright. From there, he will go about selecting a pod. Now, the pod makes up the majority of Thunderbird 2. It's a large cargo container, and he has 6 to choose from, and they all do different jobs, with the most famous being Pod 4 carrying Thunderbird 4. Although I think Pod 5 might be the most frequently used, and Pod 6 can also carry Thunderbird 4 as well. Upon selecting the pod, Thunderbird 2 will lower itself. It secures the pod to its body and starts rolling forward. At that point, an entire cliff face starts descending. Once the cliff face is fully descended, Thunderbird 2 will then roll out onto the runway. And the fun don't stop there, because as a kid you're watching this is always incredible. But as Thunderbird 2 gets further down the runway, a series of palm trees gets in the way, because its wingspan is pretty wide. So what do? The palm trees simply move aside, making way for Thunderbird 2. It will then get onto its launch ramp, which will point its nose into the sky. Virgil then activates a set of rockets and blasts off. And as a kid, you watch this launch sequence and your mind is blown. You're looking at Virgil and you're insanely jealous because he commutes to work on a slide. And when he gets to the bottom of that slide, he gets to fly Thunderbird too. And let me tell you something, right? Everybody's got their favourite Thunderbird, but everybody's favourite Thunderbird is Thunderbird 2, apart from me, because, I'm really cool. And I like Thunderbird 4 the most. And so should you, by the way. So, as I say, your mind is blown as a kid. And, as I said, these launch sequences are part of the ingredients to Thunderbirds. They are totally iconic, but I'm trying to argue that this is one of the keys to the longevity of the show. And you're sitting there typing in the comments, well, how does that work, you crazy cockney? Well, think about it like this. Nowadays, we have Blu-rays, we have streaming, we have DVDs, and if you're really poor and really old-fashioned, you've got VHS. Thunderbirds is repeated constantly. There's even a 24-hour stream of it on YouTube. Thunderbirds is ubiquitous, and we've all seen it hundreds of times. In my case, probably a little bit more, because I'm a little bit of a geek. But if you're watching it in the 1960s, or like myself in 1992, then you're out of luck, because you know fully well that you've got to wait another week to see another episode of it. And even then, you've got to be lucky, because your dad might want to watch something on the other channel, or your mum might want to drag you out to see a relative or something. But these launch sequences, they enthrall you. You want to sit there and you want to devour them, because they are so dynamic and they are so bonkers and they are so fun. So they really get your attention with them. And trust me, holding a 5-year-old's attention, that's not an easy feat. So that's why these launch sequences are so important. It's because they provide an anchor point within the show to which the child watching it, well, they will really hyper-focus. Because they know if they don't watch this now, well, they might not see it again for another couple of weeks. And they want to watch it because it's so cool. And that is something that is lost on this generation because, well, they've got YouTube. They can go and watch it 1,000 times in a row if they want to, and they'll get bored with it. But in them days, you couldn't get bored with it because you had like 30 seconds once a week to really enjoy it. Trust me, these launch sequences are a real treat. But the fun don't stop there with Thunderbird 2 because, yeah, it's got a really dynamic and really fun launch sequence, the best of all 5 Thunderbird machines, except Thunderbird 4. But it's got a few more tricks up its sleeve, and these tricks are specifically designed to hook children, pre-internet age children, I hasten to add. So, after this fantastic launch sequence, we'll get a few shots of Thunderbird 2 in flight, and it'll always look really graceful and really elegant. But then, another factor comes into play. Another ingredient to a really great episode of Thunderbirds, because Thunderbird 2 will land at the danger zone, or on the odd occasion just bring itself to a hover, but mostly it lands. And then there's always another really great treat, because that fantastic launch sequence I just said about, well, we kind of get that in reverse, because for all its gigantism, Thunderbird 2 is really dynamic. It will land, but then it will raise itself up on its legs, and in doing so deploy its pod. Virgil will flick a switch and the pod door will open. And from the pod door, we will get an awesome pod vehicle. Now these are different in almost every episode, or at least a different combination. But either way, they're going to be so much fun. And they're going to do something absolutely crazy and really imaginative with them. We will get to see the elevator cars, for instance, or the mole, Thunderbird 2's very own digging machine, or the Firefly, a gigantic bulldozer. And if you're really lucky, you'll get Thunderbird 4. There are 2 things happening here that are both very special and really clever. First off, it's like I said a moment ago, you're not going to see this for another week or so you want to pay attention to it. But you're paying attention to it for a different reason, because like I said, each week it'll be a different pod vehicle, and you never knew which one you was going to get. And the only way I can describe how I felt with that as a child, well, it would be like it was opening a Kinder Surprise egg, or the thrill you got of ripping open a birthday present or something. It's absolutely genius, and it really does immerse you into the show. And the second thing it does, well, Jerry Anderson was really keen to make the Thunderbird machines like the stars of the show, and his logic here was pretty sound because, well, no matter how hard they tried, and they really worked miracles with these puppets, they could never get them to be that dynamic. So these machines help draw the attention away from the puppets. and they bring the action sequences into very sharp focus. However, since we are still on the subject of pod vehicles, I've got a treat for you, because I've been doing some research and I've crunched the numbers, and yes, Thunderbird 2 could theoretically deploy Stingray, but I can't for the life of me think of a reason it'd need to do so, because, as we all know, Thunderbird 4 is the greatest submarine of all time. But yeah, Jerry Anderson coming to the rescue once again, and for the second time in my 37 years, revolutionising bath time. In universe, Thunderbird 2 was designed by Brains, and it seems to be pretty vogue lately to sort of retcon the origin story of things. And lately we are told that Thunderbird 2 was an advanced prototype developed in secret by Tracy Aerospace, and Brains merely updated and upgraded most of its equipment. But I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I prefer the original origin story for it, and indeed for the rest of the Thunderbird machines. I like the idea that Jeff Tracy got together with Brains and made orders from hundreds of different aircraft manufacturers. It's all cobbled together in secret by Brains, sitting there late at night tinkering, effectively building the Thunderbird machines in his garden shed. To me, that's just a far more charming way of doing it. Back in the real world though, Thunderbird 2 was designed by Derek Meddings, the special effects supervisor for the show. But I think it's about time Mike Trim got some love, because that man is a diabolical genius. Derek Meddings gave him the design for Thunderbird 2, and he's like, look, I'm happy with the design, but I don't like the front end of it. Do something with that. And at the time, Mike Trim was just a kid, like fresh out of art school. So the back end of Thunderbird 2, quite rightly, is Derek Meddings, but the front end, well, that's all Mike Trim. So in the UK, he's famous for working with Jerry Anderson, amongst many, many other people. But if you're watching this from the United States, you'll know him from something else, because he designed a very, very famous album cover. Yep, he done the artwork for Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. I want to know from you guys though, why do you love it? What is it about Thunderbird 2? Why is it everybody's favourite? My theory is two-pronged, one quite simple and one a little bit more complex. Firstly, and most simply, well, it's a great toy. You can raise and lower the pod, for instance. You can open and close the flap on the pod. You can pop its legs out. You can make it deploy Thunderbird 4. And every one of these came with a Thunderbird 4 as well, which is actually quite generous when you think about it. I mean, that's a potential fifth of your toy sales there, and you're giving it away for free with another toy. It also helps fire the child's imagination as well, because you can sit there making your own pod vehicles out of whatever bits of Lego and micro machines you can scrape together. Thunderbird 4 would always go missing as well. There must be millions of missing Thunderbird 4s in the world. Where the hell have they all gone to? And then there's the second reason, and it's a lot more complicated than the first. Now, I've said this often throughout this series, that the Thunderbird machines, well, they sort of embody the personalities of each of their pilots. Thunderbird 5 is an excellent listener, just like John. Thunderbird 4 is excitable and enthusiastic, just like Gordon. Thunderbird 3 is completely bonkers and attention-seeking, just like Alan. Thunderbird 1 is the leader, just like Scott. But Thunderbird 2 is graceful, and it is elegant, and it is courageous, it is strong, and it is brave. And no matter what, when it turns up, it will do everything it can, just like Virgil. But for all that, that's only one part of its personality, because it's doing far more than that on screen. Thunderbird 2 embodies absolutely everything that is virtuous about international rescue, and the TV series as a whole. So Thunderbirds is probably one of the only Jerry Anderson creation that doesn't take place in some shady paramilitary type organisation. Unlike Stingray and Captain Scarlet, they're not at war with anyone. Jeff Tracy is a billionaire industrialist who has taken his wealth and decided to reinvest that in mankind, because ultimately he believes it's worth saving. And to do that, he's had to create these machines, these fabulous Thunderbird machines. But he's very clear about this in the show. These machines could be perverted into just terrible weapons. And it forms part of the series narrative as well. The Hood is constantly trying to capture the Thunderbird machines. And yeah, As I said before, the Thunderbird machines and the Tracy brothers, well, they're properly tooled up, but this is only ever used for self-defence. Most of the weapons, well, they're just used for demolition. So in those fantastic scenes I mentioned earlier on, when Thunderbird 2 would deploy a pod vehicle, or it will use one of its fantastic gadgets to rescue a space capsule or something, you will never see Thunderbird 2 deploy a tank or an APC or a rocket launcher. And in doing that, it's sending a really important message to the viewer. Bearing in mind that viewer is a child, because this is a children's program. It's saying, hey, that program you just watched before this one, and the type of hero in that program, and the type of adventure they've had in that program, it's saying, yeah, that's okay, but you do know there's another way of being a hero, don't you? Because if you take responsibility for things and you use your powers to do good, then you can do wonderful things that are far better than the other option. And I've said this before on this series, but what a great message to give to children. So I think that's why it's everyone's favourite. I think it's double-handed. I think, yeah, it's because of the toys and its appearances in the show, but I think it's what it means within the narrative of the show as well. That, yeah, it deploys this really Gucci kit all the time, and it's really dynamic to look at, as well as being giant and green and fun, full of gizmos and gadgets. Always got the right tool to get the job done, but at the same time, it's delivering that really subtle message. That message of peace, and that message of cooperation, and that message of kindness, as well as bravery. And anyway, relax, as I always say, this is just my personal view on the matter. Give me a comment and let me know what you think, because I really do enjoy interacting with you guys. Also, if you've made it this far as well, please hit the like and subscribe button. And I hope to see you again next week, because we've got the final episode of this series. And it's a bloody good one as well, because we're doing Thunderbird 1.
Sounds like the end of the world. Flames dancing wild.